get something decent on the radio.
Hi everyone, I'm Lily Zhu, a PhD student at UT Austin. Welcome to this episode, Adventures in Video Games, a Bioshock talkthrough. Today, we'll be taking a look at ways in which you can critically think about video games in terms of both gameplay and narrative content. PhD student Casey Sloan will be my co-analyst. She's also the one who kindly played through a few stages of the game for us. So we'll be watching her version of Bioshock and basing our comments on her choices during her run. At the end of this episode, we'll include references to materials that, in different ways, also deal with the same topics we'll be covering. Bioshock is a first-person shooter released in 2007 by 2K Boston, later to become Irrational Games. You traverse the dystopian underwater city of Rapture. You gradually learn that this hidden society was constructed in the late 1940s by Andrew Ryan, a businessman committed to objectivist ideals of self-reliance and extreme individualism, diametrically opposed to political or cultural systems that support communitarian values. As the mysteries of Rapture unfold, you're hindered at every point by splicers, aggressively violent citizens turned monsters, slaves to their addiction to Adam, a gene-altering substance. Many critics point to Bioshock's intentional engagement with objectivist philosophy, a worldview made famous by Russian-American novelist Ayn Rand. To accompany the dystopian backdrop, the game offers ethics-driven choices that ultimately determine the player's ending in order to demonstrate the flaws in Rapture's socio-political system. Though it has spawned sequels, we'll be trying to keep most of our discussion confined to the first game. With that out of the way, let's continue to a condensed playthrough of Bioshock's Fort Frolic stage, an area of Rapture ruled over by Sandra Cohen.
The Fort Frolic stage of Bioshock here focuses on the dystopic consequences when objectivist politics guarantees that the artist need not fear the censor. Sandra Cohen, the artist who rules this area of the city, has not only had his greatest critic and competitor, Anna Culpepper, murdered, but has also started to explore the aesthetic value of human suffering and death in his works.
So you can hear him shouting, Cohen shouting, Allegro, Allegro in the background, and now Presto. So it's telling us the point of the piece, right? It's supposed to be light and fast and kind of like the name, scherzo, right? A jest, a joke.
That's a thing.
It is a thing. So it's a piece with a name that actually imbues that piano style with something meaningful. But here it's ironic, right? It's not a jest. It's not a trivial joke. It's just hiding the violence with something that's almost sarcastic.
Oh yeah, that's dark.
And
I tried so hard to get that dynamite off that piano.
I saw the hand. I was like, what is she doing? Is she trying to play the piano?
You can't do it.
Is she trying to set it off? I didn't realize what you were trying to do.
Even the dialogue expects you not to try to interrupt anything on the stage, so you are part of the audience.
Right, and here, right, we are capturing what's happening. So the audience is no longer just viewing passively, but made complicit in everything that's about to happen. So we have to participate as audience-turned-artist in the final product.
It's not even just audience-turned-artist, it's audience-turned-art. If you'll notice, in the little auditorium, there are statues who've taken the place of active living audience members. So this entire area now just feels like this very frightening performance art installation where artist art and audience is completely conflated.
So
very
it's
disorienting
blurring
ways.
here, right? It's showing us there's no clear separation in appreciating art, influencing art, and creating art. We're all involved and we should all be responsible.
So Sandra Cohen is brilliant, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, he's brilliant in his stupidity and psychosis.
Do you see it when I am dust?
Okay, so he wants us to touch living people / monsters / splicers, right? So not only is he obsessed with immortalizing monstrosity, right? He's not doing anything transcendent. He's immortalizing something monstrous. He wants us to then view it as an object that we can touch and treat as though it's not anything we can sympathize with or care about.
Yeah, it's not a person, it's a piece of art, which plays into the game's obsession with the consequences of objectivism. So what happens when you strip human nature of the chains of morality and ethics.
But now it's bled into art, right? Something that we think of as cultured and civilized, but is also involved in this process of political and individual violence.
That spotlight is following you.
Oh yeah, and so you are performing for him, but also for the player, right? Who plays him, is involved in the performance and viewing the performance.
and immortalized.
Oh, that gets really weird when you start thinking about the gamer's role. Because you are consumer and producer of this art.
Right, like this. That this is a game that was designed for you to consume, but now I'm consuming your performance of the game, which in itself has changed what the game is.
Oh, I wasn't even talking about the video. Oh, man.
Oh, but that's what I was thinking of.
We're in a spiral. I was talking about how you, the player, necessarily have to play the game to make it a complete work of art. But you are also supposed to just enjoy it, right? So you're consuming something, but you're also
creating. So you're thinking about
it.
completion, and I'm thinking about the changing of the art itself as more people are involved in the viewing and the playing.
Yes.
So, I mean, both ways work.
Sander Cohen gives you a crossbow, and all of his disciples have on animal masks. Martin Finnegan even makes a reference to rabbits. You are hunting them, essentially. You shoot them, then you shoot them with a camera.
So that phrase that he just said, the Iceman cometh, with an expletive in between, is a reference to the Eugene O'Neill modernist play about disillusionment, loss of hope, and retaining your sanity through these desperate clingings to dreams that you know are long past.
It's also particularly timely because the Eugene O'Neill play premiered in Broadway in 1946, around the time when Rapture is being built. Okay, so this was very frightening for me because all of these statues have health bars, so you have to make the decision on the fly whether or not you want to go up to one of them and smack them with a wrench.
But before you can even do that, you've been frozen.
This is also particularly scary because Bioshock doesn't have traditional cutscenes, so the player's control isn't taken out of their hands very frequently. But here, you can't move. I was mashing A.
But it's not like a traditional cutscene where it pans out into third person.
Bioshock doesn't tend to do that, which gives the game a much more thorough sense of immersion, right? Because time just flows naturally.
Which makes it all the creepier that now you have Finnegan dehumanizing you, telling you he's going to pick out a pose for you. Now you're not the one artistically dealing with other statues, right? You are a statue yourself.
Yes, you are a statue, and the you is important here precisely because this is a first-person shooter. That's the kind of game and interface you're working with. So since this is an FPS, the player effectively sees what Jack, the character, sees and interacts with the environment through Jack's virtual body.
Okay, so the player, in other words, not only controls Jack's actions, but is Jack cinematically.
Yeah, and some game studies scholars have even argued that the interface of FPSs lends itself to high levels of player presence or immersion.
Because the interface collapses the vision of the player and the player's avatar, Jack in this case, which encourages players to think of the on-screen environment as that which is immediately available to the eye. So the hands of the avatar can also often be seen, and those actions tend to correspond with actions taken by the player's hands.
For the Xbox 360 console version of Bioshock, for example, in-game gunfire corresponds to the physical action of pulling the controller's trigger. And hence, right, the shooter part of first-person shooter. Gameplay involves skill-based aiming at targets or enemies on the screen.
So the fact that the game asks you to imagine that you yourself are so close to this dangerous dystopia further reinforces the horrors and dangers of objectivism itself.
So I'm just going to say it. This game seems really uncomfortable with transsexuality and an elision of biological sex here. The fact that Cohen keeps talking about being pregnant is supposed to be creepy.
Yeah.
The fact that all of his students make casual references to their potential sexual relationships with Sander Cohen is also supposed to ring kind of odd, because of course it's descended into this violence where he ultimately just wants to kill them, Black Widow-esque.
So clearly Cohen's understanding of art and like his idea of artistic theory is really weird.
Well, they have cultural history, though. So his artistic paradigm includes elements of romanticism, aestheticism. We can see some surrealism in it, too. As far as romanticism goes, so in the late 18th century, the Romantic movement emphasized the importance of inspired imagination over something like technical skill or artistic craftsmanship.
Well, that makes sense then. So like Cohen behaves kind of deranged, distorted version of the romantic genius. He's an artist whose creative capacities are pretty intuitive and inspired by a force beyond human control. And we can, I guess, see this in Cohen's references to his muse and his conceit of the artistic work as pregnancy and maternal labor.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, this notion of romantic genius even seems to relate to objectivism's obsession with individual excellence, which is a nice segue to talk about aestheticism. So the aesthetic movement came into prominence in Europe, like the Romantic movement, but in the 19th century.
Okay, so from what I remember, they argued, or followers of the movement argued, that art shouldn't be forced to serve a moral or didactic purpose and should instead align with this like pure aesthetic ideal of beauty, right? Like art for art's sake.
Yeah, and we can see Cohen taking this notion to its extreme by valuing artistic vision over the people he kills. And Bioshock even like really insightfully suggests that art can't actually exist in a political or cultural vacuum.
Yeah, and Cohen, right, he possessively views his art as this purely personal creation, but Anna Culpepper describes Cohen as Andrew Ryan's stable boy because he generates propaganda for Ryan's system. Mm-hmm. So I do have a question though. What about Cohen's physical appearance? What do you do with that?
So that's where I think surrealism comes in, because it seems like it's functioning as an allusion to Salvador Dali because his character design looks so much like that artist. There's a similar hairline. They have that curled, pencil-thin mustache. And broadly speaking, surrealism is a 20th century movement that sought to express truths or aesthetics unavailable through traditional artistic forms of mimesis or representation. So I'm setting minds here because I'd played this game a couple of times before, so I know what's coming. So my previous experiences kind of colored my gameplay, which is really interesting from a critical perspective, because then what do you do with analysis when you have tons of different, essentially, ways of dealing with the same issue?
And I guess if we want to think about the first playthrough for someone who's just encountering the game, you have this really sweet, measured 1, 2, 3 song.
Oh, this sticks out.
Right.
Really.
And
this
then you have the absolute chaos and violence and uncivilized nature of what's happening, right, being juxtaposed.
Yeah. And specifically, this is Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers, which very ironically, in the Nutcracker Suite, comes at a point where all of the conflict in the play has been solved. The Nutcracker has defeated the Rat King, and this is basically a celebration.
Right, with Bioshock, that again, we're appropriating this pleasant experience of art and imposing it on a more violent and grotesque experience.
Mm-hmm. You're also forced to be part of Sander Cohen's artistic vision here, right? There's a spotlight shining on you throughout this entire battle that he has perversely turned into a dance.
Right. The name of this strip club, Eve's Garden, clearly is an allusion to the creation story of the Abrahamic religions. So when Adam and Eve, the first two humans, eat the forbidden fruit, God bars them from paradise. And then they bring about the fall of man by introducing sin into the world.
Eve is also often depicted as a temptress figure, since she's the one who convinces Adam to eat the fruit with her. So like Adam, Andrew Ryan's ultimate fall can be traced to an Eve figure, in this case, Jasmine. Jasmine is first seduced by Tenenbaum's promise of money for her fertilized eggs, and then she, in turn, tempts Ryan.
And then this whole chain of events leads to Jack, who kills Ryan and brings about the fall of Fracture.
So the game's story actually puts Ryan into the role of a greedy, disobedient sinner, but Ryan himself likes to emphasize his own grandeur and power. Ryan puts himself closer to God. We see him as an Adam figure.
Yeah, and remember, Adam and Eve are also the names of the gene-altering chemicals used to enhance the citizens of Rapture. So we can see that these names were supposed to suggest the advent of a new, better type of human. But in this particular dystopian setting, it's reminding us that Adam and Eve brought about humanity's expulsion from paradise.
And this game is very neatly structured when it comes to themes. So we have Cohen talking about art as labor.
And now we have this revelation about Jasmine's birth of Jack, essentially, but he doesn't know it yet.
Yeah.
And he's a piece of art too, isn't he? Right, like he's been manipulated.
He's engineered.
And engineered is a good word. He's constructed.
Which might explain why there's this, unease and anxiety in the game surrounding art, because
everyone's engineered. Everyone's a work of art.
Yeah, it's this discomfort.
Well, everyone here is a work of art.
It's this discomfort with artifice. Supposedly we have these natural springs of sympathy, and that's what we're really getting rid of when we follow objectivist philosophy. We're not behaving according to human nature. Greed and selfishness is actually just an imposed political structure. Everything here is engineered.
Well, I was saying, speaking of
Get the photo before
discomfort. Here you have this, final address of his sexuality. He was allowed, but he was vigorous.
Again, this is part of
Okay,
Raptor's
I resent that it says Cohen's masterpiece because at this point, it's our masterpiece. We did all the work.
You're a pawn. You're a moth to his flame.
I think I'm still resentful that he takes credit for the player's work. So, like, the idea that contributions and influences don't solely rely on the artist himself, right? But from all these different cultural sources. So there's really no perfect art that's transcendent. All art is in some way contaminated or exists with imbued cultural value and significance. There's no vacuum that Cohen seems to be putting forth. You can't remove society and consumer from art.
Yeah, so the game doesn't agree with Sandra Cohen. Doesn't agree with the crazy killer.
Wait, wasn't this the point where you could have chosen not to kill him?
So you actually have have an option in this game. Sandra Cohen can technically survive this entire game. He never has to die. There are 2 different points at which you are given the option, technically, to kill him. And I killed him here because he first comes down the stairs in all of his grandeur, I thought, intro to boss fight. And then he never attacks you.
So
he just
Casey preempted that.
I did.
Shot him in the head.
I did, and I shot him. And you don't have to shoot him.
Well, see, I had that moment too when I was watching your playthrough where I was thinking, is he really going to let you go? And then before I could make that decision, Casey already shot him. The morality of this game necessitated that you kill him, right? Because he's done horrible things, he's a murderer, therefore he's the evil boss that must be eliminated.
Well, it depends on how we look at the player character, right? Because throughout the entire game, you have to do horrible things. And the end reveal of the game is that you've narratively been controlled by another character named Frank Fontaine.
Well, that's a way to kind of relieve that tension in us, right? We're not evil, we were controlled. We had to do it.
Well, it has really interesting implications for these kinds of narrative video games because things like choice and free will are these delightful illusions that you kind of have as a player, right? My choices in the game actually matter, but Bioshock emphasizes that no, this is a structure that you're just running through.
Well, that also ties into this huge, art metaphor, the idea that it is impossible for us to separate society, consumer, and product, right? That we're all intertwined with each other, and that we all bear some responsibility for what the product is, whether it's positive, negative, violent, or peaceful.
So I think that is a really great segue into this critical question in video game studies right now. How do you actually analyze a video game? Because of this element of interactivity that other modes of art or production or entertainment don't have.
Right.
So I read a book, I watch a movie, but I play a game. And it seems like there's something about that player experience that alters how we look at or criticize a video game.
Bioshock is an extremely complex game that dips its metaphorical toes into a multitude of forms and genres. It's a first-person narrative set in a dystopic alternate timeline. It's a gorgeously shot horror film. It's an FPS video game. It's a social critique. And it's a work of art that changes with and against the player's choices. When it comes to Bioshock and most other video games, developing academic methodology should be inclusive of both the content and the gameplay. To separate one from the other is to neglect the defining characteristic of this new media form. All right, thanks for watching, everyone.